The line did not collapse in a single moment. There was no dramatic shout, no sudden rout, no flag raised in surrender. Instead, it bent, quietly, reluctantly, one exhausted unit at a time. By early 1940, Finland was still fighting, but the war had changed. And for the first time since the invasion began, clever tactics in frozen forests were no longer enough. Survival now depended on endurance, and endurance was slipping away. The victories of December had reshaped the psychology of the war. Battles like Tolvajärvi had shattered the myth of Soviet invincibility and electrified Finnish morale. But they had also done something else. They had bought time. And time, in this war, favored only one side. January arrived with a brutal clarity that no victory parade could disguise. The Soviet Union did not retreat to reconsider its ambitions. It retreated to reorganize. Fresh divisions poured westward. Artillery was repositioned in unprecedented density. Command structures were tightened. Logistics were reinforced. The chaos of the early invasion, the confusion, the isolation, the reckless advances began to fade. What replaced it was far more dangerous. Pressure, constant, methodical, relentless. For Finnish commanders, the shift was unmistakable. In December, Soviet attacks had surged forward and then collapsed under their own weight. In January, they advanced only after preparing the ground with fire. Days of bombardment preceded movement. Trenches were erased. Forest edges were shredded. Defensive positions that had survived weeks of combat vanished in hours. The Red Army was no longer trying to outmaneuver Finland. It was trying to exhaust it. This was a fundamental change in the nature of the war. Earlier, Finnish forces had thrived on mobility and surprise. Ski units could harass, isolate, and destroy larger enemy formations, but attrition offered no openings. You could not ambush artillery fire. You could not outflank exhaustion. Along the front, Finnish units began to feel the weight of numbers in ways they never had before. Shells fell without pause. Nights offered no rest. Days blurred into one continuous struggle to hold, repair, and survive. Weapons froze. Hands cracked. Men slept in minutes, not hours. Medical stations overflowed. Frostbite cases mounted. Psychological strain hollowed out units that still stood physically intact. The line held, but it was thinning. Every Finnish retreat was deliberate, disciplined, and ordered, but every retreat carried consequences. Ground once abandoned could not always be reclaimed. Defensive depth shrank. Supply routes shortened and tangled. The war compressed inward, and pressure intensified. Nowhere was this more visible than on the Karelian Isthmus. This narrow corridor between Lake Ladoga and the Gulf of Finland was the key to the entire war. It was a direct approach to Finland's political and industrial heartland. The Soviet Union knew it. So did Finland. Here, the Red Army concentrated its power. Artillery barges reached staggering levels. Entire sectors were shelled day and night. Finnish bunkers, carefully built but lightly reinforced, collapsed under sustained fire. The ground itself was transformed. Snow melted into mud beneath explosions. Forests vanished. Familiar terrain became unrecognizable. Finnish soldiers fought on ground they no longer knew. Holding the isthmus became an act of will as much as strategy. Units rotated when possible, but there were too few replacements. Ammunition was rationed. Food was scarce. Sleep was rare. Men fought until they could not. Then others took their place, until there was no one left. The breaking point did not arrive as panic. It arrived as silence. When units stopped responding, when trenches stood empty, when commanders realized that entire formations had ceased to exist, not through retreat, but through attrition, the Finnish line began to fracture. These fractures were not dramatic breakthroughs at first. They were gaps, small at first, then wider, then impossible to ignore. Soviet forces exploited them relentlessly. By February 1940, the Red Army achieved what had seemed impossible only weeks earlier. It broke through major defensive positions on the Karelian Isthmus, not through brilliance, through persistence. Wave after wave, shell after shell, losses that would have destroyed any smaller nation were absorbed and replaced. The Soviet Union paid in blood. and it kept moving forward. For Finland, this was the darkest moment of the war. Victory was no longer imaginable. Even holding the line was becoming uncertain. Inside Finnish command, the mood shifted from defiance to calculation. Every order now carried moral weight. Hold and risk annihilation. Withdraw and surrender ground that might never be recovered. Neither choice felt like victory, but one offered survival. Withdrawals began. They were disciplined, orderly, and necessary, but they introduced disorder. Supply lines were rerouted overnight. Units arrived at new positions before defenses were prepared. Communications failed under constant pressure. In the confusion, mistakes multiplied, and the Red Army pressed harder. As the front moved closer to the heart of the country, civilians felt the war tightening around them. Cities endured air raids. Villages emptied. Refugees flooded roads and forests, carrying what little they could salvage. Families were separated, homes abandoned, futures frozen in uncertainty. The war was no longer distant. It was intimate. In Helsinki, the reality became impossible to ignore. The government still functioned. The army still fought. But time was gone. Finland could not fight a long war against a superpower, and the world was not coming. Peace negotiations resumed, not from strength but necessity. Every day the war continued meant more territory lost, more lives spent, more leverage gone. Finland faced a bitter truth. The choice was no longer between victory and defeat. It was between survival and destruction. When the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed in March 1940, the guns finally fell silent. Finland remained independent, but the price was enormous. Large territories were ceded. Strategic depth was lost. Hundreds of thousands were displaced from their homes. The Finnish line had broken, but the nation had not. The consequences of retreat extended far beyond Finland. The Soviet Union emerged bloodied and shaken, but intact. Its military had suffered terribly, yet it had endured, and it had learned. The Red Army that walked away from the Winter War was not the same force that had entered it. It was more cautious, more centralized, more brutal. The world watched and misunderstood. Observers remembered early Soviet failures. They remembered Tolvajärvi, Suomussalmi, and the chaos of December. They underestimated what adaptation and pressure could achieve. Those misjudgments would soon shape decisions far beyond Finland's borders. For Finland, the legacy was complex and enduring. It had lost land, but preserved sovereignty. It had retreated, but never surrendered. It had bent, but not broken. The Winter War revealed a hard truth about history. Wars are not decided by moments alone. They are decided by what comes after those moments. Tolvajärvi showed what was possible. The retreat that followed showed what was unavoidable. And in the narrow space between defiance and endurance, Finland chose survival. The line broke, but the nation held. And that choice would echo through the rest of the century.